Well, hi everyone, and happy Hump Day. I am Laura Dixon with Spur Sports and Entertainment, and I am a proud co-founder of the Pro Sports Assembly. On behalf of our board, we want to welcome and thank you for joining today, and specifically to our founding members. Thank you for being early adopters, getting involved, and for inviting your friends and colleagues to do the same. The work of bringing the mission and purpose of the Pro Sports Assembly to life, it takes a lot of work, and it's in our hands, just as the future of pro sports is created and shaped by us. So the real power of professional sports is in its people, and I want to just get to the people who are leading the way. Just this week, Jessica Berman was recognized by Adweek as a 2020 Woman of Power in Sports. And we know her power, her influence and impact as she is a member of the advisory board for the Pro Sports Assembly. Her day job, though, is serving as the Deputy Commissioner of the National Lacrosse League, the growing National Lacrosse League. And she is the highest ranking female executive in men's professional sports. We could not be more excited to have her featured in our first From the C-Suite class for the Assembly. She is interviewing the illustrious Lyle Thompson of the Georgia Swarm, and he is one of the most well-regarded, respected, and decorated lacrosse players of all time. We are especially grateful for his voice in raising awareness around the history and future of Indigenous people in sports. So Jessica and Lyle, welcome. We look forward to learning and growing through your conversation. I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, Laura, Adam, and everyone at Pro Sports Assembly for your vision and for your leadership and really paving the way to help our industry to be better. And can't wait to work with you on all the initiatives to come. A few housekeeping matters before we get started. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. I can filter those questions into the interview with Lyles, so would love to know what you all are interested in hearing. If you have any comments or want to just say hi and introduce yourself and chat with one another, you can use the chat feature that's at the bottom of your screen. So Lyle, I'm so honored to be interviewing you today. As a member of the Pro Sports Assembly, I can't think of a better person to help enlighten us to build competency around cultural and gender intelligence. You have so many accomplishments, so before we get started with the questions, I'll just mention a few of the highlights. You've shattered many lacrosse records at virtually every level of the game, including high school, college, internationally, and as a pro. Your successes are just as impressive off the field and floor as they are on, and you have demonstrated your commitment to community service, teaching the game and the culture and history of lacrosse. And you have used your platform for change in a positive and intentional way. And having observed you both during my time in the NLL and before, and the way you have done that, I just want to start by saying that you're a role model for all athletes, young and old. And thank you for everything you do to use your platform for change.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, and I'm excited to share some of the things that have been passed on to me, some of the things I've learned, and have this conversation.
That's great. So let's get right into this. I'm sure, and sometimes I find this a little bit depressing, but for purposes of this conversation, I'd like us to assume that many people listening today are not familiar with the Indigenous culture and history in North America. And I'd like to just ask you to start by sharing just some general information about your culture and help us all to understand the ways that we can honor and respect your people.
Yeah, I think just to start, I guess I'll just describe who I am, where I come from. My Ungohoe name, my traditional given name is Te Hasanunde. It means he's flying over us, and I'm from the Onondaga Nation, part of one of the 6 nations that are part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And where I grew up was just south of Syracuse, New York, on a small reservation there, where lacrosse is our main sport. It's a part of our culture. It's a part of our community. But I guess if I were to, share what my culture is, and I think when people think Native Americans, they might think like tree huggers and just a lot of, I guess, woohoo. But for me, I like to explain it as a way, like my culture is just giving thanks. My culture is being respectful. So within our culture, within my culture, it's all about finding ways to give thanks. We have what we call a Thanksgiving address. And at any gathering, any meeting, any ceremony, we give a Thanksgiving address. And it starts with giving thanks to people, to the earth, to everything, right? From the animals, the plants, the berries, the wind, the thunder, the stars, moon. We go right around the whole universe, really. And that's our culture. That's my culture. It's just giving thanks and finding ways to be thankful. You can say thank you all you want, but it really doesn't mean as much unless you're being thankful. So when I talk about, and we're going to get into this, but when I talk about the things lacrosse has taught me, a lot of it stems from my culture first. Lacrosse was sort of just my vehicle, my crutch, to really understand it and really have faith in how to, throughout life, that's what people learn is how to, balance these things and how to understand how to be happy, how to find enjoyment, and how to be thankful. And it really does just create this domino effect where, if you're being thankful, you're essentially most likely being respectful. And that domino effect kind of continues on to happiness and just enjoying the little things in life and being present, being in the moment, and really optimizing on some of the things you're doing. Maybe it's lacrosse, maybe it's training, maybe it's diet, maybe it's, all the things of life. It allows you to really understand yourself a lot better. So when I talk about my culture, that's what I want to share is it's nothing crazy, and we're still here. That's the crazy thing to me is a lot of people don't know Native Americans still exist. I went to high school with kids that had never been to my reservation, which was 10 miles away from their house. They thought we still lived in a ancient sort of tribal way. And in a sense, it is a very tribal, in tight community, but we live in houses. We drive vehicles. That's the case. So it's just sort of crazy to me that's one thing that has to be addressed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I feel like you just led us through a mindfulness meditation. I was taking notes. You can't really see them all behind me, but I have quotes all around my office that inspire me. And I'll definitely be going back and watching the video to try to glean some of that for my own inspiration about being thankful. So appreciate that. I'd love to learn more about the way that lacrosse sort of grounded and inspired you. And I know I've heard you talk about the stick and the wooden stick and the respect for the stick and sort of why and how that's so connected to your culture. If you could share and elaborate on that.
Yeah. I always start with the stick because I really did personify my stick. My stick was my best friend. I treated it like I would treat a person. And when I was younger, I had to learn that respect, obviously. And I learned a lot through my culture. But at one point as a kid, I did leave my stick outside, and it was a traditional wooden stick. So you have to understand these traditional wooden sticks, there's a lot more that goes into them in making them. The stick maker has to go out and find a specific tree. And when he cuts that tree down, there's a Thanksgiving to that tree. There's a passing of life So it is sort of taking this new transformed life from that tree. And then from the catgut to the netting to everything inside of it. There's a lot that goes into it. It's not like today's modern sticks, but I grew up using one of those right up until I was 12 years old. And I left mine outside. And, you know, my father had a talk with me about it the next morning. He had this big, long talk to me, you know, me being like a 9-10-year-old, not understanding a lot of what he was saying, but it was all about respect, where the stick comes from, how the stick is made, and how the stick can really become a vehicle for me. And, you know, from that day forward, I started to treat it a whole lot better. I did treat it really good before. It's just I did make that mistake. And I would spend every day with my stick. I would sleep with my stick. My stick was always beside me. So I start with that because for me personally, and everyone's got a different story, but for me personally, all the lessons I learned through, not all of them, but the big lessons at the start of my career came from my stick. And I knew that if I treated my stick really well, it was going to treat me really good. And I was, in essence, just growing this connection with this stick that was essentially making me a better lacrosse player, something I love to do. I would spend, if it were up to me, I honestly think that I would spend 8 to 10 hours a day playing lacrosse. If I would just had a free day where, you know, my parents just stayed home, it was a weekend, I'd be outside all day, jumping from different sport to sport, but for the most part, it was lacrosse. And I would create these imaginary games and tournaments inside my head, and I would just play with my brothers, play with myself. So when it comes to that, that's where I think I first learned respect. And really the three main lessons I learned from the game: respect, optimism, and fun, passion. I learned all those sort of things grew with me along with my stick.
That's beautiful. As a mom of 2 boys, I wish my kids would go in the backyard and just have imaginary games and play by themselves. We could probably have another whole session talking about what's happened to youth sports today and how structured they've become, and the lack of creativity really doing a disservice to the next generation of athletes. I'm sure you would say that a lot of your athleticism comes from the creativity that you had around learning the game.
Yeah, I think it starts with creativity of the mind. You know, I mean, you have to have an imagination, and you know, our kids nowadays in today's generation, they're losing their imagination younger than when I think they should. You know, I mean, I have a 9-year-old, and she acts like a 13-year-old, but at the end of it, like, you have to have an imagination, which is essentially creativity. And when you have that creativity in your mind, there's no limits. You know what I mean? When I was in the backyard, when I was in practice, I had imagined these things. You have to imagine them first before you can actually throw out a move or the way you pick the ball up, or just get creative with the game itself. So I never thought of myself as going out and creating these new moves. I just did what I like to do, which was playing the game. And I never thought of it as any different. You know what I mean? I was just using my imagination. So I think that's a huge part of the game. And still to this day, I try to really get that inner child out of me so that I can get it, because I go outside, I still to this day. Now it's more structured and more of like a to-do list. Like, okay, get outside, get 100 touches in or 1,000 touches in. And you know, it's not so much from a passionate state as much as it is like work almost, but I still do, you know what I mean, at the level I'm at today, you still have to work to get that inner child out of you so that you can still have fun with it.
I'm going to take a question that just was sent to me in the Q&A. His or her name is Fish, so thank you for the question. The person writes, Lyle, obviously you have a great natural ability and work ethic to be your best. Do you feel your cultural upbringing, your beliefs make you a stronger teammate? And do your teammates have a greater understanding and respect for where you come from, having played with you?
I think so. I think I'll sort of answer the end of that question first, because that I always like to touch on that, because when I first got into the game, Native Americans in general, we were very disrespected. A lot of racism, a lot of, you know, racist remarks toward us, a lot of making fun of my hair, my culture, stuff like that. And with the path I've taken, and, you know, with credit from the generation before me, guys like Cody Jameson, my brother, Marshall Abrams, Neil Paulus, guys that have sort of beaten down the path for me to sort of have an easier route through. They've taken a lot more of that I guess racism, but with what I've accomplished with me, my brothers, my cousin accomplished in college, it has gained some respect from a lot of people, and allowed a lot of people to understand where this game does truly come from. Because for a long time, and still to this day, you know, there are people who look at it as, you know, a rich, white, preppy sport. And now you're seeing companies, you're seeing organizations, you're seeing leagues really start to give credit to where it's due and where this game comes from, and share the history of this game. And I think some of that stems back from what the Iroquois Nationals have done, and what a lot of these recent Native American athletes at the college level have done. So, you know, I'm really thankful for it, that we've been able to I've been a part of this sort of journey that has helped gain respect to Native Americans and the game of lacrosse.
Yeah, so that's a perfect transition. Most of the people who are tuning in and who are members of the Pro Sports Assembly work in professional sports. They work at leagues, teams, and unions. And I can say from personal experience, having spent the majority of my career at the NHL, which also has the sport of hockey, obviously has ties to the Indigenous community. And obviously now in this current sport, almost even more so. I would say for those of us and my peers who work in sports, I think even for the organizations who have wanted to be respectful and pay homage and tribute to the Indigenous community, I think there's a lot of question about how you do that respectfully and authentically. So it's a long background to ask you the question, and I'm careful to not put the burden of the entire Indigenous people on your shoulders, but from your perspective, what are the ways that professional leagues and teams can respectfully honor the tradition and culture of Native Americans?
Yeah, I mean, I think communication is a huge part of it, because like you just said, I mean, I can't speak for all Native American communities, all these Native American nations. So in terms of what my experiences and what I've seen, there's just been a lack of communication. And, you know, if you have that communication, you're gonna see, we're first of all gonna see your intention and where you're coming from. And there's no mistakes like you've seen with the US lacrosse issue, like you see with different issues across the board, whether it's mascots or, you know, that US lacrosse issue. So I think to answer that question, the most important part of it is something as simple as reaching out to a community member, because then at least you have a point of view, and most community members they're gonna ask too. You know what I mean? If you ask me for my opinion, I'm not gonna give you the answer. I'll tell you I'm gonna get back to you, and I'm gonna speak with some of my elders. I'm gonna speak with my mother, my father, and get different inputs, so that as a community we're well represented and we're not disrespected, which is what we've seen too many times in the past.
Yeah, and I love that response, because you know, I think a lot of assumptions are made, and oftentimes it's as easy as just asking the question and seeking to learn. And I know that's one of the things we're working on with this organization, is really just giving people permission to be on a journey of learning. I think that's the most important thing that's come out of some of the inclusion movement this past year, is really an acknowledgement that everybody's on a journey of learning and nobody has all the answers. And there isn't a one size fits all solution. Like you can't give me a script for how a team can show respect or honor or have a Native American Heritage Night. There is no script for it. But it's good advice to say, just ask the question.
Yeah. And everyone's going to have their own opinion. You know what I mean? That's what you already see. So I could always give you my opinion, but that doesn't mean somebody else might think different, or might throw a comment on your Native American Heritage post, a bashful comment. So, you know what I mean? So it's all about, as to me, if you're doing things in a respectful way, you are going to reach out. You are going to have that communication, and you're going to have good intentions.
So with all of that as a condition for how to go about those sorts of initiatives, what are some of the things that you've either been a part of or observed or experienced in sports that you feel were done in the right way?
I mean, I think just in terms, staying on topic with like a Native American Heritage Month, or a, you know, Indigenous Peoples Month, Native American Heritage Game, anything like that. From what I've seen, they come from really good intentions, and a lot of it is education, which is the root of a lot of these problems, is, you know, not having this information, because you're not learning about these things in the history books. You're not learning about them in school. You have to go off script to learn about my history. So, and part of it is because it is very, our culture is very oral traditions, but also with the relationships between Native America in the US, or Native America and Canada, there has been a lot of hidden stuff that a lot of people don't know about, like residential schools, like a lot of the treaties that have been abandoned. So a lot of these things aren't talked about. But I guess to answer your question, I don't really have like a specific example besides like I enjoy, you know, from my experience, my personal experience down in Georgia for the Georgia Swarm, we have a Native American Heritage Night, and they reach out to the players themselves. They reach out to community members from Cherokee Nation. And I just feel like it's done in a very respectful way. Nothing's rushed. They're not doing it with just, hey, let's get this off the checklist. You know what I mean? Native American Heritage Night. It's done in a really respectful way. Us, the Native Americans, are very involved, and it's an opportunity, which I'm very passionate about, to educate. Before the game, I go out, I speak with a crowd of people, and whoever shows up early, you know, an hour and a half before the game, and I get to, all the Native Americans get to introduce ourselves. We get to talk about our experiences being Native American in lacrosse. We get to talk about our culture, and we get to educate. So to me, I think that's an important aspect, and it's a respectful way of going about it.
Yeah, that's great. A couple of people are asking about, which was on my list to get to, and you mentioned it as well, that what happened with the Iroquois national team. I think that was a moment in time where both the Native American story as well as the sport of lacrosse really transcended beyond our niche, and it got a lot of attention. So I guess the first question is, were you involved in what happened leading up to the planning for the World Games in 2022 in Birmingham, and what was your perspective on sort of how that all happened and where things ended up?
I mean, I guess I'll start from the start. I was surprised, you know what I mean? Seeing it on Twitter, I think I was down in Annapolis for that MLL championship, but the first thing I thought was it was a mistake. I thought there was some kind of mess up on the post, but it wasn't. So it was sort of a surprise, but also not a surprise because it's happened to us over and over. Every 4 years, we experience it. Every 2 years, every time we go to these events and we have to travel on our passports, or even just something as simple as getting the invitation, it wasn't a huge surprise to me. It didn't take me long to make sense of it. So I wasn't involved in any of those things. Obviously, I use my platform to sort of speak out on it and help people understand why this is happening. Like I did with my Twitter post, help people understand that we do have a lot more hurdles to jump than the rest of these nations. And if you want to talk about it from the actual root of it, you can look at the treaties and understand that we're being recognized as a nation when you have a treaty with the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, because a treaty is simply just an agreement between nations. So if you don't recognize us, if you're recognizing us as Canadian or American, then it just shows there's only one person that's living up to the treaty, honoring that treaty, honoring that agreement. And that's all we want. We want to be recognized for being Native American. And a lot of that, I guess that whole situation, that was essentially what they were trying to take from us by not inviting us, because you don't recognize the Iroquois Nationals as a nation state or a nation, and they think it'll limit their chances into getting into the Olympics. I'm not sure that's the complete case. Obviously, everyone has their stories, but that's my take on it. So I think I do look at the whole situation, and I think it was really good for the lacrosse community, because it's not often you see a whole community come together and support one thing, and one thing that's right. So that was sort of the optimist way of me looking at it. Was like, this brought a lot of people together and helped people understand some of this battle that we continue to face every 4 years, and it's not going to stop. You know what I mean? It's going to be a surprise when we don't get an invite to the Olympics, or they're trying to not accept us into the Olympics. But it's also not going to be a surprise, because we're getting really good at sort of jumping these hurdles in this race. And we're every experience gets us more and more prepared. So I just hope that one day, we're being recognized for who we are, for being Native American, Haudenosaunee people. And in a small sense and in a big sense, lacrosse is our vehicle. Lacrosse has been a vehicle for our sovereignty, because before, lacrosse is what got us to start handling this passport issue, traveling, further and further out of the US and Canada. And I want to see that for other Native American communities, because for the most part, just for, I guess, the audience's understanding, if you're, Navajo or Ojibwe or Lakota, a different Indigenous nation, you're recognized under the US or Canada. And we're fighting for that. We're fighting against that, because we're always listed as something else. CNN listed that during the election. We were listed as something else, or other, or Alaskan Native. And I'm not any of those. I'm not Alaskan Native, I'm not other, and I'm not something else. I'm Haudenosaunee. And for the most part, that's all we're trying to fight for. We're trying to fight for our identity and our sovereignty. Mm-hmm. And lacrosse is our vehicle.
So in one of the, I would say, greatest moments of allyship, when the Ireland team volunteered to give its spot to the Iroquois national team, what did that mean to you? What did that signify to you?
In for them, I think it was they just knew it was the right thing to do. And for us, I think it's the start of a really strong relationship. And I don't know what that relationship's gonna mean going forward, but I'm extremely grateful for the act they've done. And in some way, shape, or form, we have to sort of, give them our thank you and continue this relationship, because they did what was right, which is not always what you see in society. You don't always see people, you don't always see people or organizations making choices simply because of the fact that it's the right moral thing to do.
Yeah. I know I was inspired by that, as I know a lot of other people were. So we talked a little bit about growing up in Onondaga Nation, just outside of Syracuse. I know that you're the youngest of 4 boys, all of whom played professional lacrosse in the National Lacrosse League. So you guys were obviously doing something right there. I can only imagine what your house was like, having 2 kids myself, and I know you have 5 kids. I can hear them in the background. I know we're all dealing with homeschooling.
Yeah.
Tell us what it was like being the youngest of 4 boys, and how that sort of shaped your life.
So just to clarify, I am the youngest of the boys, but I also have a younger sister. But it wasn't, when I look back on it, I don't think it was too chaotic. We didn't fight. We were very close. We were a very close knit family, and we did everything together. And, I grew up until I was, I think 11 years old or 10 years old, I grew up without electricity or running water. And not because that's sort of the lifestyle on the reservation. It was just our road hadn't gotten a water line through it or electric line. So we grew up without electricity, running water. When it was nighttime, it was time to go to bed. When it was daytime, we were outside. There was nothing to do inside. So we very involved in sports. I ran cross country, played lacrosse, played basketball. Jeremy wrestled, Miles played hockey. My sister played softball and volleyball. So we stayed really busy, and a lot of doing things as a family, whether it was laundry, going to a laundromat, going to a grocery store, going to my sister's softball games or my brother's games. Everything we did was as a family. And still to this day, we're a really tight-knit family. But it was, my childhood memories were good. I don't have, there's no big traumas or anything like that when I look back on it. It's all positive things.
So after high school, you went on to play at Albany, and I'm wondering, was that the first time you lived off the reservation, and what was that transition or experience like?
Yeah, it wasn't easy, but it was only 2 hours away from home. Jeremy went to Syracuse, so he was 10 minutes away from our house. So he didn't have to I don't even think he lived on campus for the most part. He just stayed at home and went to classes and practice whenever he had to go. So it was, for some reason, it is really a big cultural shock for a lot of the natives, because I think there's this, I guess, a negative look on going off to college, because it's looked at, for a long time, it was looked at as frowned upon, because a lot of things, we want to keep it our traditional ways and make sure we didn't lose sight of those values, because the system we were going into could be a little bit different and draw us in and take us away from what we believed was the way of life you should live. But for me, going off to college was, I guess, a little bit easier, because I had Miles to go with me, 3 other natives, Edmund Cathers, Mike Miller, Ty Thompson, and I was playing lacrosse a lot. I had my first child going into my freshman year. So I stayed really busy. I learned how to balance my time really quick between athletics, education, being a father, and not really having much time for much else. So I stayed really focused, and that freshman year taught me a lot. I really learned how to manage time and balance sort of life.
Yeah, I can imagine that it would be a shock and a big transition. So I know you're super tight with your brothers, and that you created a company called Thompson Brothers Lacrosse in 2014. Tell us about that work and what some of your goals are with Thompson Brothers Lacrosse.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our goals are, it started off as just spreading the game of lacrosse, and we quickly realized that it just felt like a quick money grab. And we didn't like the feeling from it. We didn't like that we were doing camps everywhere and we were just in and out. So we sort of shifted our attitude, and we wanted to make sure that we were doing events that were meaningful to us, but also meaningful to other people. We wanted to build relationships and build communities and help instill, I guess, a plan for these communities, always come back and always grow these relationships. So now that's what we're continuing to do. It's, for us, it's more so about giving back. And I will say our focus is inner city and in reservations. So we want, I guess, the less fortunate to have the opportunity to learn from a game that's so young and has a lot to be discovered and a lot you can capitalize on, because lacrosse is so young and it's growing at a rapid pace. But because it's so young, it does open up the door for more opportunity for college scholarships and those types of, it's not an overpopulated sport yet. So that's the way I sort of like to look at it. But I also think there's just medicine in the game, and it's important to be active. That's the main thing we focus on, is being active, living a healthy lifestyle, because a lot of these communities we go to, Native communities especially, they're facing high diabetes rates, high drug and alcohol abuse rates, high suicide. So these are things we like to focus on, we like to touch on, we like to counsel and help where we can.
You talked a little bit earlier about some of the less than kind language that you and others have heard and faced who've come before you. And I'm sure you encounter that with kids that you're coaching, or your own children perhaps, or children who are fans of the Georgia Swarm who look up to you. What advice do you give those kids, or even adults who are dealing with those types of situations where they're encountering racism?
I always like to use it as a way to strengthen myself, because I, for the most part, growing up, it was, I guess when I was a teen, it wasn't so easy, but once I got to college, I got so used to it that it was easy. And I don't think it's right to get used to it, but there is a positive way to look at it, because it is strengthening you. And now I use it as a way to educate, to let people know that things like this still do exist, and how can you sort of capitalize on take an optimist look at what you had experienced. So that's sort of my advice, is because you can't let it drag you down, especially in athletics, because we talk about the Philly incident where the announcer had something to say about my hair. Someone in the audience had something to say, and that was the first time in like 20 years that I let words get to my head in the middle of a game. And you could see I was playing with frustration on the field, if you watch the last like 4 or 5 minutes of that game. So I always touch on that and make sure that that's not the approach you go, because in the moment of the game, you always want to stay present. You always want to stay in the zone. You want to be, you want to make sure you're performing. So you have to have thick skin and a way of handling these things and a way of being an optimist, so that you can sort of look at situations and understand that this is happening for me and not happening to me. You're not taking things personal and thinking that it's happening just to you and specifically to you, but more so that it's happening for you and there's something for you to learn from it.
Yeah. I'm sure a lot easier said than done, right? So we're going to start to close out, and I'm going to sort of move into the last section with some rapid fire questions, some quick hitters. First question is, I'm sure you're really healthy in how you treat your body just by everything that you've already shared, but hopefully you're human and you have a cheat meal. So what's your cheat meal if you want to sort of treat yourself to something yummy that's not so healthy?
Yeah. Honestly, it's not really a meal, because I honestly 100%, I truly do enjoy healthy food. Like, I enjoy a good steak. Like, if I were to have a cheat meal, it'd be at like cheesecake with a fillet with asparagus, but I treat myself to like a milkshake and a cheesecake. You know what I mean? So I treat myself with like the liquids and the dessert. And when it comes to the meal, I like a homemade salad that I can make. I like, a nice chunk of meat. So I don't get too unhealthy in terms of like that. I do like pizza once in a while, but I never go too crazy. I don't eat fast food or anything like that. So I would say I just treat the dessert I can drink, I love milkshakes and smoothies.
Nice. And I see people are submitting a couple of questions. So after I go through a couple of these rapid fire questions, I'll try to roll in the questions that you all are submitting. So keep them coming. The second one is, what's your favorite workout song at the moment?
Workout song. I don't listen. I always listen to podcasts when I work out.
Oh, really?
So I'll throw you a podcast. I like Joe Rogan. I like Oprah Winfrey's podcast, Super Soul Conversations. If you can tell, I'm more of a serious type. So I usually like to listen to things that are like educational, even when it comes to music. Like, I like super deep music that makes me think.
What's your favorite sport to play other than lacrosse?
Right now, golf. I'm highly addicted to golf. But growing up, it was always basketball.
What about to watch?
Sport to watch. I would say MMA. I like watching like the UFC fights, stuff like that. I hate watching golf, and I don't like watching in-season basketball unless it's playoffs.
If you could meet one person who you have never met, who would it be?
That's a good one. I would have to go with Oprah. Love to sit down and have a conversation with her.
All right. Well, maybe someone who's watching or listening to this can make that happen. I wish I could make it happen for you, Lyle, but I don't know Oprah. So getting to a couple of these questions that were submitted, are there any, and this is a great question, are there any national associations that serve or support Indigenous rights and issues that sports organizations can look to for partnership, education, and resources?
So is there like national organizations that like professional organizations could reach out to for?
Like that, so if let's say the National Lacrosse League, as an example, wanted to partner with a Indigenous organization, like a nonprofit or a trade association that provides education or tools and resources, are there sort of nationally recognized organizations?
Honestly, I'm not completely sure, but I will say, and I touched on this on sort of my U.S. lacrosse rant, was that we're us as people, we're really starting to understand how to scratch our own back. Whereas you look at the U.S. lacrosse situation, and they were using our names for their profit, and we weren't even doing that. You know what I mean? Our own the Iroquois Nationals weren't doing that to ourselves, but now you're seeing organizations that are like the N7 Fund with Nike. I guess that's a good one. Is they do a lot of Native American education, Native American health and wellness. They focus on fitness for the most part, health and wellness, but they still do a good job of educating within these communities, storytelling. But now I think what I'm seeing across Indigenous country is that movement is people starting to form these nonprofits and these organizations that are educational, in that, you know, organizations like the NLL or the NBA can reach out to and be like, hey, can we partner? How can we help each other? We'd like to, you know, spread some awareness within Native American communities, stuff like that. So I would say we're on the rise and really starting to get our ducks in a row, starting to figure out how to scratch our own backs, how to utilize our own history, rich history, I'll say, into helping ourselves in this new world.
Yeah, well, that's important. So before we wrap up, I'll end with one final question, which is, and this is a serious one. So I know you're a serious guy, so maybe you've thought about this. Considering how amazing your career and your life has been and how impactful, what do you want your legacy to be?
It's whenever I think about that, I guess what I want my legacy to be, it doesn't really involve me. It involves my experiences in reflection in other people. So I think when I think about my legacy, I just hope that, you know, not from direct contact or direct experience, but the next generation and my kids and my grandkids are living in a healthier world and living with a better understanding of the systems we live in, because I think that's a huge part of figuring this all out, figuring out living in balance. Because I think for the most part, we're being taught how to think, we're being sort of programmed how to think. The age of information is basically telling us to not think, because all the information's right there on your device. So I just want I want there to be a reflection in the next generation and how to live with the rest of the beings of the earth, rest of the beings of the universe, which is what my culture teaches. It teaches us how to live with the earth and how to show respect and how to give thanks, and just how to have the understanding that it's there. You know, we're not superior to the plant life or the animal life or anything else. We're not above those things. We're right beside them. We're all a part of life. And I think in terms of that, when my legacy, lacrosse has been my vehicle, but I don't want people to think of me and think lacrosse. I just hope the impact on the next generation has a positive influence. Might be a little confusing, but
No, well, it's clear to me. So thank you for that. And I know you've already had a positive influence, and I'm sure with the many years to come, you will continue to do that. I want to thank you for spending this almost hour with me and with PSA. Thank you to Pro Sports Assembly, Laura, Adam, and everyone else, including you, Lyle, working on behalf of advancing inclusion in our industry. I think we all share a passion for sports and knowing that sports is a platform for change. And I know I feel privileged every day to use that platform to do good. So thanks for joining me in that. I hope you all will visit prosportsassembly.org Before you go back to your day, please hang back for a quick video that describes the work of PSA.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Lyle.
Yeah.
So what is the Pro Sports Assembly? We're the people who work in professional sports, at teams, leagues, and unions who are committed to the advancement of diverse and inclusive leadership across our industry.
From staff, administrators, and executives to team owners, operators, and innovators, we strive to lead by example.
As a member of the Assembly, you will join industry leaders and gain professional development tools, have access to an exceptional network, be invited to participate in forums and fellowships for professional development, attend exclusive events, and engage in discussions led by industry executives.
So why now? Professional sports is at an inflection point. Our industry has great influence, global reach, and incomparable community impact.
Pro Sports Assembly.
Pro Sports Assembly.
Pro Sports Assembly.
United in game plan.
Diverse in council.